Babuiga, welcome back to the Garifuna Experience Podcast. I'm your host, José Francisco Ávila. Today's episode begins with a critical question that directly impacts our visibility, resources, and political future. What happens when we accurately describe who we are, but the government's classification system codes us as something entirely different? What happens when Garifuna people identify as Black, Latino, Afro-Indigenous, and Garifuna, but administrative coding rules reorganize those identities into statistical categories that make our Black presence and our distinct Garifuna identity less visible? This is not an abstract academic exercise. Census data determine how federal civil rights protection are enforced, how political district boundaries are drawn in our neighborhoods, how billions in public funding and community resources are distributed, how political representation is measured across our communities. The numbers determine who is visible, and visibility determines who has power. The numbers did not change, the classification did. A peer-reviewed study titled Black and Some Other Race, examining shifts in the Black Latino population in the Census Bureau's 2020 race question, provides undeniable empirical evidence for concerns Garifuna advocates have raised for years. Authored by Ricardo Henrique Lowe, Yasmiyn Irizarry, Nancy López, Edward Vargas, and Shania Montufar, the study analyzed how technical modifications to the census race question and back-end writing processing altered the classification of Black Latinos. The findings are striking. The number of Black Latinos classified as multiracial surged by more than 300%, representing roughly 646,000 additional people categorized as multiracial in just 2 years. At the same time, the population classified as single-race Black Latino dropped by over 33%. This massive shift did not occur because hundreds of thousands of Afro-Latinos suddenly changed their identity. The researchers proved that technical question wording and back-end coding rules mechanically manufactured the shifts. In short, the people did not change, the classification system did. The study found that Black Latinos who wrote in their national or regional origins, particularly first-generation immigrants and Spanish speakers, were more likely to be shifted into the multiracial categories. This has direct consequences for the Garifuna community. We are Black, we are an Afro-Indigenous people, we share national origins across Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize, and the wider Central American diaspora. Being Latino does not diminish our Blackness. Being Black does not erase our Garifuna language, culture, or indigenous roots. Our identities coexist. When administrative algorithms treat our multifaceted heritage as competing categories, statistical erasure occurs, even when community members answer the forms honestly. Why classification dictates power? Why should we care whether official tables record someone as Black alone, Black Latino, or multiracial? Because census data are not passive records. They are active instruments of governance, civil rights, and equity. Data baselines are required to monitor discrimination in housing, employment, and public services, redistricting, and representation. Electoral boundaries are drawn based on these counts. If Black Latinos are categorized outside of Black demographic totals, analysts risk undercounting the true strength of the Black electorate. Targeted investments. If Garifuna ethnicity is swallowed up inside generic national origin aggregates, public agencies conclude our numbers are too small to require dedicated language access, healthcare outreach, or cultural funding. This creates a dangerous paradox. We become socially visible, but statistically invisible. We fill neighborhoods, churches, civic organizations, and cultural corridors across New York City, yet remain difficult to track in the data sets that allocate public resources. Counting our community is only the first step. The Census Bureau must classify, code, tabulate, and publish our data accurately. Federal warnings and early mobilization. This classification risks take a greater urgency as preparations begin for the 2030 census. The Government Accountability Office recently cautioned that the Census Bureau significantly reduced the scope of its planned 2026 operation tests, cutting field sites from 6 down to 2, Huntsville, Alabama, and Spartanburg, South Carolina, and eliminating or scaling back 10 of 19 operational test activities. These cutbacks risk finalizing 2030 design without sufficient field testing in diverse, dense urban centers. At the same time, investigative reports from Wired reveal controversial federal proposals seeking to curtail demographic race questions and exclude undocumented residents from apportionment tallies. Digital-first portals and unverified administrative records cannot replace dedicated multilingual community enumerators. If testing occurs only in suburban Alabama and South Carolina, the Census Bureau cannot know if its system functions for a bilingual Afro-Indigenous community in New York City. Building local infrastructure. The New York City Council Census 2030 Task Force. While challenges loom federally, New York is taking decisive steps to organize early. New York City Council Speaker Julie Menin and civic leaders recently convened the inaugural meeting of the New York City Council Census 2030 Task Force. This initiative builds directly upon the newly established Municipal Office of the Census. Building local infrastructure, the New York City Council Census 2030 Task Force, spearheaded by Speaker Menin and signed into law to maximize local participation and engage historically undercounted populations well ahead of 2030. Alongside Speaker Menin, the task force is led by esteemed co-chairs L. Joy Williams, president of the NAACP New York State Conference, Emily Paez, associate vice president of policy and advocacy at United Ways of New York, Jeffrey M. Wise, director of New York Elections, Census, and Redistricting Institute, and distinguished adjunct professor and senior fellow at New York Law School. Over the next year, the task force will conclude research, lead neighborhood outreach, gather public testimony, and publish concrete recommendations to ensure New York City achieves the most complete, accurate, and inclusive count in its history. Statewide coalitions and the push for census funding. Local policy must be backed by state resources and robust research. Right now, the Immigration Research Initiative is surveying community-based organizations across New York to demonstrate the necessity of dedicated New York State funding for 2030 census outreach. For community advocates and leaders listening today, when community groups submit their operational data to the Immigration Research Initiative, it provides the empirical evidence lawmakers need to fund grassroots outreach. At the statewide level, the New York State Census Partnership is aligning advocacy, academic, and philanthropic efforts led by a coalition including the New York Civic Engagement Table, the New York Immigration Coalition, the New York Law School Census and Redistricting Institute, Engage New York, the New York Community Trust, alongside statewide partners. This partnership provides mapping and demographic expertise and ensures historically undercounted communities are actively engaged throughout both the census count and the subsequent redistricting cycles. A Garifuna 2030 advocacy framework. To ensure our diaspora is recognized within this city, state, and federal initiatives, the Garifuna Coalition and our partners are advancing 5 core priorities. Demand coding transparency. The Census Bureau must explicitly publish how responses marking Black or African American and Hispanic or Latino with a writing of Garifuna are coded and labeled. Publish disaggregated data. The Bureau must release detailed standalone counts for Garifuna populations across race, ethnicity, language, and geography. Mandate Afro-Latino field testing. Question designs, translations, and enumerated procedures must be tested directly within Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous communities. Deploy clear community guidance. When final 2030 instructions are adopted, community organizations must provide clear instructions so residents can declare their full identity without triggering administrative misclassification. Build independent community data infrastructure. We must continue documenting our population through community surveys, oral histories, organizational rosters, and neighborhood mapping so we never rely solely on external systems to validate our presence. From census data to electoral influence. Census data directly shapes the boundaries of political representation. Recent legal developments regarding the Voting Rights Act underscore that grassroots participation is vital to protecting community voice. When political maps and administrative processes threaten to dilute community presence, high civic participation makes that presence undeniable. For our community, this reinforces the necessity of a sustained primary voter conversion program. Voter registration is a starting point, but turning out in local primary elections, we must connect every link in the chain of empowerment. The census documents our demographic presence. Redistricting translates numbers into legislative districts. Primary turnout converts community presence into voting power. Civic leadership translates electoral participation into lasting policy outcomes. A call to action. Data is never purely neutral. Every statistic reflects a question design, a coding standard, and an administrative decision about who is highlighted and who is grouped into an aggregate. For the Garifuna and Afro-Latino community, we must be counted accurately. We must be classified accurately. We must be tabulated visibly. And we must convert that data into organized civic strength. The numbers did not change, the classification did. By organizing across city coalitions, state partnerships, and grassroots networks, we ensure our community is fully recognized and empowered. And that wraps up another episode of the Garifuna Experience Podcast. Thank you for listening. The future of the Garifuna people is in our hands as we build prosperity, voice, and progress. Until next time, stay united, stay proud. Sungu Lida Aba. Ayo. Listen to new episodes of the Garifuna Experience Podcast every Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube, Amazon Music, Podcast Index, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate, subscribe, and review the Garifuna Experience Podcast. It helps our history, culture, and advocacy reach audiences worldwide.